Energy media readers, there has been a tremendous amount of discussion about the COVID-19 effect on the economy, the global economy, the Canadian economy, and a lot of discussion about what's going to happen after COVID-19 and what the pandemic response may mean for decarbonization and the energy transition. To discuss that with me today, and to talk about a couple of interesting ideas, we've got Uday Varadarajan, who is a principal in the electrical practice at the Rocky Mountain Institute out of Colorado. So welcome to the interview, Uday.
Thanks so much for having me.
Now, you wrote a very interesting SPARC article, and could you maybe just give us a brief overview of the argument in that article?
Sure. As a result of the crisis that we've seen unfold, there's been a tremendous amount of financing put out by governments across the globe, specifically aimed at many of the industries, cities, states that have been negatively impacted by climate. A lot of this debt could, in principle, be forgiven as a way to incentivize carbon reductions in other public goods. So, for example, you could take the debt that has been provided and forgive it based on the amount of carbon that a given company is willing to pursue reducing over time.
So, for instance, in Alberta, that's the home of the oil sands, which is the largest GHG emitting industry in all of Canada. I think it's like 11% of national emissions. And it will be getting some federal money here probably this week, actually. The government is going to announce a package. And from your point of view, in this idea, that there could be strings attached to that, that if the industry reduced their emissions quicker, then some of that, whatever support is provided, could be forgiven. Have I got that correct?
That's right. The idea would be to provide an incentive, a positive financing opportunity during recovery for a lot of these companies that are suffering now to think now and develop innovative ways to actually reduce their carbon when they recover and come back in a year or two.
Using, again, the oil sands argument, the companies have been working on new ways of mining bitumen or bringing it up from the in situ, instead of using light hydrocarbons, instead of using steam, which requires natural gas, they would use light hydrocarbons. They have a lot of this technology, but of course, being engineering cultures, they want to do it very slowly and pilot and test and make sure, which is all wonderful, except it doesn't work really well for climate policy. And in a case like this, we could send them positive signals to help them speed up that process. Would that be a good application of your idea?
Absolutely. It's precisely because there are ideas out there and options that I think in the ways that we've used, particularly in the US, but also potentially in Canada for supporting carbon reductions, we've often chosen approaches that were easy or immediately clean and have missed a lot of really interesting opportunities that in particular involve creativity from a lot of the companies that are negatively impacted by many of the carbon policies out there. And giving them the opportunity to innovate is something that we can take, sort of develop as a transition-first approach to climate policy. And creativity like this that keeps carbon in the ground or otherwise sequesters carbon while still producing valuable goods and services is one of the critical areas where I think we could unleash quite a bit of innovation and economic activity through an approach like this.
Now, we've been, governments have been grappling with this issue for a long time, and climate policy, at least in Canada, for certainly over the last few years, has really been put on the national, we're having a national discussion in a way we never had it before, and governments are serious in a way they were never before. But the policy levers sometimes seem like blunt instruments, and I know that's the case down in the US as well. Are we seeing now more willingness to be innovative, to be creative, to do things outside the box that we weren't willing to do a year ago, 5 years ago?
I hope that that's the case. And I think it's coming from a couple of different places. One, there's a realization that the economics is shifting and that the risk around climate transition as well as physical climate risk is becoming more real. And I think there's a greater willingness to engage on all sides to find solutions that work. But, it requires compromise on both sides, and it requires some creative thinking. We've had climate policies in the past that have often created polarization and not necessarily been particularly productive in reducing the tensions and addressing head on some of the basic problems that we face. And one of those is, when there's when you put on a carbon price or put on or use an incentive, almost inevitably, the folks who have the most work to do and are most negatively impacted by a particular that policy, the ones who are currently emitting carbon, in all of those cases are the ones who directly are negatively impacted by the mechanism put in place. But to put in a carbon price, that doesn't have to be the case. And this is, and I think there is some room for some creative thinking, because we have to do it. Our approaches to the past have not created political compromises that have been sustainable. So now's the time to innovate. And I think there is some openness to such innovation today.
Uday, thank you very much for this. Really appreciate it. And we will be coming back to you in the future, I don't doubt, because this is going to be a pressing issue. It's a pressing issue now, and certainly will be in our post-COVID-19 environment. So thank you very much for this.
Well, thank you so much again for the interest and the opportunity to talk.